The forest never stays silent when fate is about to change a life. Emily Parker heard it first as a distant vibration beneath the night wind, a low, uneasy sound that did not belong to the calm of the trees. She stood at the edge of Blackridge Woods, her breath shallow, fingers tightening around the worn fabric of her jacket as pale moonlight filtered through the branches above. Somewhere beyond the hills, hunters were moving, their presence heavy like a warning carried through the air itself. Emily was an Omega, marked not by strength or status, but by the way others had always looked through her as if she were part of the background. Tonight, however, something felt different, as if the world itself was holding its breath. She took a careful step forward, her boots pressing softly into the damp earth, when a sudden sound cut through the silence. A deep, fractured growl, not of aggression, but of pain restrained with unbearable effort. Her heart stuttered. She should have run. Every instinct she had ever learned in a world that told Omegas to stay invisible demanded it. But instead, she followed the sound. Through the tangled trees, past the narrow bends of shadow and silver light. Emily moved closer to something she could not yet see but already felt shifting the air around her. The wind changed direction, carrying a scent of iron and rain, of exhaustion and something unfamiliar beneath it, something powerful trying not to collapse. When she finally saw him, everything inside her froze. A man stood half-supported against the roots of an ancient pine, his posture unsteady but still refusing to fall. Lucas Hawthorne, though she did not know his name yet, carried the kind of presence that made the forest seem smaller around him. His coat was torn from travel, his breathing uneven, yet his gaze remained sharp, scanning the darkness as if refusing to surrender to it. Emily pressed herself behind a fallen log, her pulse loud in her ears as distant voices echoed through the woods, hunters searching, closing in slowly, methodically. She did not understand why she moved forward instead of away. Perhaps it was the way he steadied himself despite his condition, or the way the forest itself seemed reluctant to let him go. A branch snapped somewhere to her right, and Emily flinched, instinctively lowering her presence, holding her breath until the sound passed. The hunters moved closer, their lanterns flickering like distant stars between the trees. The man lifted his head slightly, as if sensing their approach, yet he did not run. Instead, something in his expression shifted, less fear, more resignation, as if he had already accepted every possible outcome except one. Emily's hands trembled as she made a choice that defied every rule she had ever been taught. She stepped forward into the open, the moonlight catching her silhouette as she whispered into the night without knowing if he could even hear her. The forest seemed to pause again, as if recognizing that something irreversible had begun. Emily remained still for a moment that felt longer than it should have, her breath caught between instinct and uncertainty as the forest around her seemed to listen. The man ahead did not move toward her, nor did he step back, but his attention shifted in a way that made her acutely aware that he had sensed her presence long before she revealed herself. The faint sound of approaching footsteps grew clearer now, breaking through the quiet rhythm of the night, and Emily understood with rising tension that the hunters were no longer far away. She took a cautious step forward, keeping her voice low, almost fragile against the vastness of the woods, asking him if he could stand. The man's eyes lifted toward her fully for the first time, and there was something in them that did not match his condition, something steady and unyielding beneath exhaustion. He did not answer immediately, as if measuring whether words were necessary at all, and in that silence Emily felt the weight of something larger than fear, something like responsibility pressing into the moment. Another sound echoed between the trees, sharper this time, and Emily made a decision that surprised even herself. She moved closer, placing herself between him and the direction of the approaching hunters, her body tense but deliberate, as though instinct had taken control where thought had failed. The man watched her with quiet focus, and for a brief moment, the forest felt suspended again, as if the world itself was recalculating the meaning of what it had just witnessed. Emily whispered that she did not know who he was, but she could not leave him there, and the words seemed to settle into the air between them like something irreversible. The man exhaled slowly, his posture shifting almost imperceptibly, as though her presence had disrupted a long-held silence inside him. The distant lantern lights flickered through the trees, closer now, and Emily could feel the pressure of time tightening around them like a closing circle. Yet instead of retreating, she lowered herself slightly and extended her hand, not as a demand, not as an expectation, but as a choice she could not fully explain. The forest wind moved through the branches above them, carrying the faint glow of moonlight that touched the ground in scattered silver patterns, and in that fragile space between danger and decision, something unspoken passed between the two of them, as if the night itself had begun to acknowledge a shift that could not be undone. The moment Emily extended her hand into the open air felt like the entire forest had shifted its attention toward her. The wind slowed. The distant movement between the trees became more deliberate, and even the faint rustling of leaves seemed to hesitate, as if waiting for a consequence that had not yet arrived. The man before her finally moved, not toward the approaching hunters, but slightly toward her, closing the small distance between them with a controlled effort that revealed both exhaustion and discipline. His gaze remained steady on her face, studying her not with suspicion but with a kind of restrained curiosity, as though her presence had disrupted an expectation he had long accepted about the world. Emily kept her hand extended, though her fingers trembled slightly, and she could feel her heartbeat in her throat as the forest behind her grew brighter with approaching lantern light. The hunters were closer now, their path cutting through the woods in a slow, searching pattern that left no room for uncertainty. Still, Emily did not step away. Instead, she lowered her voice and told him they did not have much time, her words soft but firm, shaped more by instinct than reasoning. The man's expression shifted subtly at that, as if he recognized the truth in her urgency without needing proof. He finally spoke, his voice quiet and controlled, carrying a depth that did not match his weakened condition, asking why she had not already left. Emily hesitated for only a moment before answering that leaving him there felt impossible, even if it defied logic or safety. For the first time, something like surprise flickered in his eyes, brief but unmistakable, as though he had not expected anyone to make such a choice for him. The forest behind them cracked with another sound, sharper now, and Emily instinctively turned her head slightly, confirming that the hunters were closing in. Without fully understanding why, she stepped even closer to the man and motioned toward the deeper part of the woods, where shadows were thicker and visibility thinner. He followed her movement with his gaze, then slowly shifted his weight forward, accepting the direction she indicated. Together, they moved into the denser part of the forest, their steps careful and synchronized without needing instruction, as if the situation itself was guiding them. The lantern light behind them flickered through the branches, occasionally revealing silhouettes that passed between the trees, but the deeper they moved, the more the forest seemed to conceal them. Emily could feel the tension in her shoulders ease only slightly, replaced by a growing awareness that the man beside her was not simply someone in need of help, but someone whose presence carried a gravity she did not yet understand. When they finally paused beneath the cover of a large, ancient tree, the air felt heavier, quieter, and more still than before. The man looked at her again, this time with a focus that lingered longer, as if memorizing her decision rather than merely acknowledging it. And in that silence between them, something unspoken began to take shape, subtle and unfamiliar, like the first sign of a path neither of them had intended to walk, but now could no longer ignore. Under the shelter of the ancient tree, the world around Emily and the injured man seemed to narrow into a smaller, quieter space, as if the forest itself had chosen to hold its breath around them. The distant lanterns continued to drift between the trees, but their light felt weaker here, filtered through layers of branches and shadow that turned every movement into something uncertain and distant. Emily stood close enough now that she could hear the man's breathing more clearly, steadying itself in a controlled rhythm that suggested discipline even in exhaustion. He did not lean on her, nor did he step away, but instead remained still as though evaluating not only the situation but her presence within it. Emily kept her focus on the direction they had come from, listening for any change in the sound of footsteps or voices, but there was only the soft disturbance of wind passing through leaves and the occasional crack of distant branches. The man finally spoke again, his tone lower than before, asking if she understood what she was doing by helping him. The question was not harsh, but it carried weight, as if it had been asked more from experience than doubt. Emily hesitated, her eyes still scanning the forest edges, before admitting that she did not fully understand anything about this situation, only that leaving him there had felt wrong in a way she could not ignore. At that, the man's gaze shifted slightly downward, as if her answer had reached a place he was not used to considering. The silence between them stretched, not uncomfortable, but filled with the tension of unspoken awareness. The forest around them seemed to grow stiller, and even the wind softened as if reluctant to disturb what was unfolding beneath the canopy. Emily noticed that the man's posture, though still strained, had become more stable, as if her presence alone had altered something in him that was not physical but deeper. She asked quietly if he could continue moving if they needed to go further, and he responded with a brief nod that carried both confirmation and restraint. Without further hesitation, she motioned deeper into the woods, choosing a direction where the trees grew closer together and the light faded more completely. As they moved, Emily became aware of an unusual sensation, a subtle shift in the air around them that felt almost like recognition rather than coincidence. The man walked beside her without speaking, his steps measured, never rushing, yet never falling behind, matching her pace with an effortless awareness that made the silence between them feel intentional. Occasionally, Emily glanced at him, noticing how his eyes scanned not only their surroundings but also her movements, as if reading patterns she did not know she was creating. The deeper they went, the more the forest closed in around them, until the distant lantern lights were no longer visible, replaced entirely by moonlight filtered through dense branches. Emily finally stopped near a narrow clearing where the ground leveled, and the air felt slightly cooler, and as she turned to check behind them, she realized that for the first time since she had stepped forward, the sense of pursuit had faded into something uncertain and far away. The man looked at her again in that stillness, and this time there was no question in his expression, only a quiet acknowledgement that whatever had begun between them in the open forest was continuing now in a place where neither danger nor certainty could easily follow. Emily lowered herself carefully to the forest floor, feeling the cool dirt and soft moss beneath her palms as she guided the man toward a small natural hollow that offered both concealment and stability. The moonlight filtered through the treetops, scattering silver patterns across the uneven ground and highlighting the subtle shift in the forest air that seemed to respond to their presence. Lucas Hawthorne moved slowly beside her, each step deliberate, yet he allowed her to lead, trusting in a way that felt unspoken and quietly profound. Emily could sense the rhythm of his breath aligning with the gentle rustle of leaves, creating a harmony that contrasted with the distant movement of lantern light through the trees behind them. She paused for a moment, glancing over her shoulder, and the forest beyond seemed to stretch endlessly, filled with shadows that whispered secrets of ancient growth and unseen paths. Emily whispered softly, suggesting they take a brief moment to rest, and he nodded, leaning slightly against the edge of the hollow while keeping his gaze alert, scanning the surroundings without drawing attention to himself. The quiet that followed was almost tangible, filled with the subtle sounds of the night, the soft murmur of wind through branches, the distant calls of nocturnal creatures, and the occasional snap of a twig far away, marking movement that was neither threatening nor immediate. Emily took a deep breath, feeling her chest rise and fall with a calm that contrasted sharply with the urgency that had driven her forward only moments ago. She studied Lucas in the soft light, noticing the way his eyes reflected the moon in pale silver, and she understood in that instant that there was more to him than the man she had initially encountered. His presence carried weight, authority, and a quiet intensity that commanded attention without words. The air seemed to thicken with anticipation as she shifted closer to adjust his position within the hollow, ensuring he was supported but not constrained, and she felt a subtle warmth radiate from the ground, a gentle reassurance that they were temporarily safe. As she worked, she realized that each motion, each careful placement, was shaping not only his comfort but also the unfolding connection between them, a silent acknowledgement of trust and mutual recognition. The distant lanterns now appeared only as faint glimmers, their movement slowed by distance and shadow, leaving the forest around them almost entirely to the silver embrace of moonlight. Emily whispered again, suggesting they wait until the night deepened further before moving again, and Lucas inclined his head in agreement, the weight of his gaze still on her, but softened by the understanding that they had, for now, found a reprieve in this secluded moment. Every sense was heightened, from the faint scent of pine and damp earth to the subtle shift in temperature as the moonlight danced across the hollow, and Emily felt a quiet thrill at the realization that she had guided them both to a space where the danger was paused and the possibilities of what might follow could begin to unfold, a fragile but significant breath of night that belonged entirely to them. The stillness inside the forest hollow began to feel deeper, almost unnatural, as if the night itself had folded around Emily Parker and Lucas Hawthorne to protect something neither of them yet understood. The moonlight above shifted slowly through the branches, casting soft silver lines across the uneven ground, and Emily found herself watching those patterns as much as she was watching the man beside her. Lucas remained steady against the edge of the hollow, his posture controlled despite the fatigue that lingered in the subtle rise and fall of his chest. There was no urgency in him now, only a quiet awareness that seemed to stretch beyond the present moment, as if he was listening to something beneath the surface of the world. Emily sat a short distance away, close enough to respond if needed, but far enough to give him space, and she could feel the silence between them evolving into something heavier than words. It was not discomfort, but recognition without explanation. Lucas finally shifted his gaze toward her, and in that moment Emily noticed how the faint glow of the moon seemed to gather in his eyes, giving them a pale, almost reflective quality that made him appear both distant and present at once. He asked her, quietly, if she had ever been in this part of the forest before, and Emily shook her head, admitting that she had only ever stayed near the outer paths where the light remained visible and familiar. His response was slow, measured, as if considering more than just her answer, and he told her that places like this often held memories that did not belong to any single person, but to the land itself. Emily listened, uncertain how to interpret his words, yet sensing there was meaning beneath them that she was not yet ready to fully grasp. A faint breeze moved through the hollow, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth, and with it came a subtle change in the atmosphere, as though something in the distance had shifted direction. Emily straightened slightly, her attention sharpening again toward the surrounding forest, but Lucas lifted a hand just slightly, not to stop her, but to steady the moment, as if he already knew what she was sensing. He told her calmly that they were no longer being actively followed, at least not in a direct path, and the certainty in his voice carried an unexpected reassurance. Emily exhaled slowly, realizing only then how tightly she had been holding her breath, and the tension in her shoulders eased by a fraction. Yet even in that brief release, she remained aware that nothing about this situation felt ordinary. The forest seemed quieter now, but not empty, and the distance between safety and uncertainty still felt fragile. Lucas looked toward the canopy above them, where moonlight filtered through in thin, shifting strands, and for a moment he said nothing, as if measuring the significance of the night itself. Emily followed his gaze, and in that shared silence, something subtle began to settle between them, not spoken, not defined, but unmistakably present, as if the world around them had acknowledged a turning point that could not be reversed. Lucas finally shifted his weight fully, taking a cautious step forward, and Emily felt the subtle tension in his posture ease just slightly, as if her guidance had allowed him a small measure of balance he had not realized he could find. The hollow around them seemed to expand in response, the dense branches above parting here and there to allow streams of moonlight to fall more clearly across the forest floor, illuminating patches of moss and the uneven roots that crisscrossed the ground. Emily adjusted her position, kneeling slightly to reach a spot that would support him more comfortably, and she noticed how his eyes followed every movement with quiet intensity, absorbing the care she offered in a way that went beyond mere necessity. A soft breeze moved through the trees, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and pine needles, and Emily allowed herself to close her eyes for a brief moment to draw in the calm it offered, knowing that the hunters were no longer immediate in their concern, though the awareness of being watched lingered at the edges of her mind. Lucas spoke softly, almost a murmur, commenting on the stillness of the forest and the clarity of the moonlight, and Emily realized that in sharing this small observation, he was inviting her into a space of trust that had not existed before. She responded with a quiet acknowledgement, speaking of the patterns of silver on the ground, how they seemed almost deliberate in their arrangement, as if the forest itself was offering them guidance or reassurance. For a long moment, neither moved, and the world seemed suspended, with only the subtle noises of nighttime creatures and the whisper of wind through branches marking the passage of time. Emily noticed how the air carried a gentle warmth in the immediate space around them, a faint sensation that was difficult to describe but unmistakable, giving a sense that their presence together had altered the environment in a way that was small but meaningful. Lucas looked toward her with an expression that was both attentive and reflective, his attention undivided as if the events of the night had condensed into this singular moment, focusing entirely on the interplay of quiet, moonlight, and the shared effort to remain undetected. She felt the same awareness settle over her, a combination of relief, concentration, and something unspoken that neither dared yet name, and it created a rhythm between them, subtle and steady, that pulsed along with the soft night air. Emily shifted slightly to adjust his coat against the chill, and in response, Lucas offered a brief nod, the slightest acknowledgement that she understood more than words could express. Around them, the forest continued in its quiet motion, shadows shifting with the sway of branches, moonlight glimmering intermittently, and the depth of night stretching outward in all directions, a protective curtain that held them within its embrace. In the silence, they shared a tentative understanding, a mutual recognition that the night, the forest, and the circumstances had brought them together in a way that was fragile yet profound, a pause in time where the world felt contained within the hollow and every heartbeat carried significance. Emily felt a sense of calm. Determination settled within her as she prepared for the next move, knowing that whatever lay beyond the hollow would require the same care, focus, and unspoken trust that had brought them this far, and she realized that in this shared attention, something deeper had begun to emerge between them, subtle, steady, and unmistakably present. The moon hung low in the sky, casting its gentle silver glow across the dense forest canopy and creating a delicate web of light and shadow that danced on the forest floor. Emily Parker shifted slightly, her senses alert to every subtle movement of air and sound around them, feeling the pulse of the night as if it were a living entity surrounding both her and Lucas Hawthorne. The man beside her had regained a small measure of composure, and though his stance was still careful, there was an undeniable strength radiating from him that seemed to respond to the steadiness of Emily's presence. She noticed the way his eyes followed each flicker of movement through the leaves and branches, aware of the forest beyond the hollow, and yet focused entirely on the path she had chosen to lead him. Emily's hands moved deliberately as she adjusted the positioning of his coat to shield him from the chill of the night, and in that small act of care, an unspoken connection seemed to solidify between them, subtle and profound. The distant sounds of the hunters had faded almost completely, replaced by the whispering of the wind through the pines and the soft rustle of small nocturnal creatures stirring in the underbrush. A gentle silence settled over the hollow, deep and encompassing, giving the sense that the forest itself had granted them a temporary reprieve, a safe space in which the urgency of the night could pause. Emily lowered herself to a crouch beside him, speaking softly about the patterns of moonlight that traced irregular paths across the moss and roots, describing them as if they were a language written by the night itself, and she felt a quiet acknowledgement from Lucas in response, a nod and the slightest incline of his head that suggested understanding without the need for words. The air between them felt charged with subtle energy, not visible or loud, but present in the way the silence seemed thicker, more tangible, as if their shared awareness had altered the rhythm of the night. Emily could sense a shift within herself as well, a quiet determination rising alongside a deepening curiosity about the man beside her, a need to understand the strength and depth reflected in his stillness and the way he had allowed her to guide him to safety. Lucas shifted again, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that carried both recognition and measured reflection, acknowledging the unspoken trust that had grown between them over the course of the night. Emily felt the forest embrace that moment, the silvered leaves glimmering faintly as the moon traced arcs across the canopy, casting soft highlights on their faces and shoulders. And in that shared quiet, an unmistakable sense of destiny hovered just beyond the edge of awareness, waiting for the night to reveal the next movement, the next decision, the next step in a journey that had begun in urgency and now unfolded with a delicate, deliberate rhythm. The first light of dawn began to filter through the thick canopy above, softening the edges of the forest and casting long, gentle beams of gold and silver across the moss-covered ground where Emily Parker and Lucas Hawthorne remained, still seated in the hollow that had sheltered them through the night. The air had shifted, carrying the crisp scent of early morning and the subtle warmth that comes with the rising sun, blending with the lingering coolness of the night, creating a space that felt both safe and suspended in time. Emily moved slightly to adjust the small bundle of his coat that she had arranged around him, ensuring he remained supported while also allowing the soft light to touch him in a way that revealed the quiet strength of his presence without disturbing the fragile stillness of the moment. Lucas turned his gaze toward her, his expression softened by the gentle illumination, and for the first time that night, there was a visible easing in his shoulders, a release of the weight he had carried since their encounter. Emily noticed it immediately, and it filled her with a sense of calm, assurance, as though the night had not only protected them, but had also allowed something essential to emerge between them. They remained silent for a long stretch, listening to the faint sounds of birds beginning their morning songs, the gentle rustle of leaves in the wind, and the distant movement of small animals through the underbrush, all of it combining into a symphony that made the forest feel alive and aware, yet respectful of their presence. Slowly, Emily extended a hand toward him once more, this time not out of urgency, but as a gesture of understanding and connection, and Lucas accepted it with a measured, deliberate motion, his fingers brushing against hers in a touch that was brief yet meaningful, a recognition of trust, of shared experience, and of the unspoken acknowledgement that had grown through the long night. They shifted together, moving a few steps deeper into the hollow to a patch where the moonlight and early sunlight mingled, creating a natural spotlight that seemed to honor their presence. The soft illumination caught in Emily's eyes and reflected in Lucas's, creating a mirror of awareness between them that was profound in its simplicity. In that space, the forest felt as if it had paused, granting them a moment of clarity, a shared understanding that went beyond words and beyond the events of the night, that what had begun as a moment of instinct and necessity had transformed into something enduring and quietly powerful. Emily drew a deep breath, feeling the energy of the forest and the presence of Lucas steadying her own heart, and she realized that the fragile tension of the past hours had given way to a sense of purpose, of connection, and of destiny beginning to reveal itself with the first light of day, a promise held in silence, in trust, and in the steady, unspoken bond that now existed between them.